Okay, and we're live.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome to everybody. I trust all of you and your families are well, and it's good to see you all here. I'll go to the legal officer just now, but I'll just remind you it's a meeting in public, not a public meeting. The officer will say, of course, it is being recorded and videoed. I would ask everybody to mute their devices, and I would like the officers to introduce themselves at this stage, please.
Emma Parks, the Head of Development Management.
Good afternoon, I'm Agent Smith, the Major Applications Team Leader.
Good afternoon, I'm Angela Moore, Planning Officer.
Good afternoon, I'm Joy Ukadike, Legal Officer for the meeting.
Good afternoon, I'm the Council's Monitoring Officer and Head of Legal.
Come on, Liz and Joe.
Good afternoon, I'm Joe Gutwell, Democratic Services Officer.
And I'm Liz DePauli, I'm also Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you very much. Could I ask the legal officer to give a bit of a fuller introduction vis-a-vis the meeting's protocols? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a brief reminder of procedures and behavior during the meeting. Could you please make sure, as the Chairman has said, that your phones and other devices are switched to silent if they're in close proximity to you? Everyone's responsible for managing their own microphone by keeping it muted unless unmuting when invited to speak. This includes any roll call votes. Following the presentation and member discussion, members will be asked to vote on each item. The roll call vote is called alphabetically, so to make it as smooth as possible, please could members be poised in readiness to be called and unmute your microphone before you vote, and then mute yourself again afterwards. You're only able to participate in the vote if you have been present at the meeting for the duration of that agenda item. That means by being able to hear and be heard by the chairman. If you should lose visual connection during the agenda item, you're still able to vote, but if you lose audio connection to the meeting, however briefly, for that agenda item, you should return a vote of abstain. There may be technical issues with connectivity that mean you leave the meeting unintentionally. Unfortunately, if this is the case, you would have to abstain on the item that you missed part of. To re-enter the meeting, use the Zoom invitation link. If a councillor has an interest and does not wish to attend part of the meeting, the hosting officer will put them in the waiting room and return them to the meeting when the item is finished. Some members of the public are making representations by video recording, which may be played at the relevant time, and members of the public or parish council representatives wishing to participate in the meeting will be held in a waiting room by the host until it is their turn to speak. Should the chairman wish to adjourn the meeting at any time, they will advise that the meeting is to be adjourned and state what time the meeting will be reconvened. All participants are asked to remain in the meeting with their microphones muted. Finally, the meeting is live streamed and you will be seen and heard by members of the public, so it's important to behave professionally at all times. There may be a few seconds delay between the end of the meeting and when the live stream and recording are stopped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. I do have apologies from Councillor Wright. Does Democratic Services have any other apologies, or any other member?
Yes, we also have apologies from Councillor Rowbottom.
Okay. Right, so it's apologies from Councillor Wright, Councillor Rowbottom. Thank you very much. I move on to item 2, which are the minutes of the previous meeting. Are you all happy that's a true and correct record, and may I sign them in due course at a later date? Everybody happy with the minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. As I say, I will sign those at another appropriate time and place. Item 3 is declarations of members' interests. Do any members wish to declare an interest? I see Councillor Circus's hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure whether I need to declare an interest in relation to item 9. I'm sure my learned friend, the monitoring officer, will tell me. This is the Millstream Veterinary Group. I think fundamentally this involves an extension to the Arran veterinary practice. And if so, I was going to say I'm a patient there, but that would be misunderstood. Let's just say we've got pets that are treated at the Arran Veterinary Surgery in Storrington, and I don't know whether I need to declare an interest because it seems to me this application is fundamentally about an expansion of that practice.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis. From what you've said, I would say that it's a personal interest, and providing that you feel that you can make a decision at this committee meeting today based upon the planning merits that are before you, taking all of that into consideration and not being swayed by the fact that your vets maybe frequent or hopefully not frequent this particular surgery too often, then you're absolutely fine. So I would say it's a personal interest. But probably and most likely, and obviously it's up to you, this is your decision, provided you can make that decision based on the application in front of you on planning merits only, then I think you're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
What a great opportunity, but I won't say nothing. Councillor Clark, do you wish to declare an interest?
Yes, Chairman, same interest, same reason. So
I don't think there's much need to go into any detail. I don't see a conflict. Well, I could work one up, but I can't see any for both of you. If the monitoring officer's happy with that, I think we all are. Okie dokie. Thank you very much. Announcements. I have no announcements. I don't believe there are any announcements from the chairman or the officers have any announcements. So that being the case, we will then move on to item 5. You have the appeals in front of you, which you've been able to study in the past few days. Does anybody wish to comment on the appeals? I see Councillor Serkis's hand still up, but I don't think, does he want to comment?
Yes, he does. I just thought I'd say, Chairman, that I thought some of the addresses for these appeals were somewhat eccentric. Bramble Barn, Bramble Lane, Horsham, Fakenham. Dial Post, Horsham, West Sussex. I just thought I mean, presumably the public see this sort of information and they might be a bit confused at the eccentricity of some of these addresses.
Well, I don't think we have any control over that unless the head of development wishes to comment on this important point.
They're generated from the system, but it's certainly something we can look at in terms of future appeals in the committee agenda.
Okay with you, Councillor Serkis?
Yes, it's just it came as a surprise to me to find that Fakenham was part of Horsham.
Yeah, okay. Point noted and point taken by the officers. Thank you very much. Right, let's go on to item 6, which is an application for demolition of existing buildings, erection of residential building and a B1 commercial office space in Stenin. Would the officers care to do their presentation?
Hear me okay? Okay, I'll just get the screen shared. You can do that, Adrian, thank you. There we go. This is a full planning application for the demolition of existing buildings and the erection of a residential building comprising 9 houses and apartments and a B1 commercial office building with associated parking, cycling and bin storage and landscaping. So the application site is at the former B&W loudspeaker manufacturing facility located along Elm Grove Lane to the east of the High Street in Stenning. The building currently has a lawful B1, B2, B8 mixed commercial use but the building's lain vacant for over a year since the company relocated to more suitable premises. As you can see from this slide, the site's located partly within the Stenning Conservation Area, which is demarked by the blue hash lines, and opposite 2 listed cottages, which are shown in yellow. Elm Grove Lane is a narrow lane open to traffic, and the main access into the site, as existing and as proposed, is via this route. So here are some photographs showing the building as existing. The top left photo shows the elevation facing onto Elm Grove Lane, and given its position in the conservation area and its orientation facing towards the lane and the cottages opposite, this elevation is considered to be the building's most sensitive. The remaining pictures show the building's eastern and northern elevations, as well as the access road that runs through the middle. And the existing car park on the northern side can also be seen. This slide shows the existing street scene along Elm Grove Lane. Key characteristics to note include the narrow curved lane, a mixture of set forward and set back 2-storey cottages, stone walls, flint facades, brick coining detail, and slate roofs are some of the key design characteristics. The picture on the top right shows the site in context with a commercial building next door, which is known as Grove House. And this measures up to about 7 metres in height. This slide shows the proposed site plan. The residential element of the proposal would be located on the southern side of the site, and the car park and separate office accommodation would be accommodated on the north. The overall footprint of the main building hasn't changed dramatically from the existing, except for the building line that fronts onto Elm Grove Lane, which has been set back by a further 2 metres, which creates a full setback from the main lane of around 6 metres. And this has given the opportunity for additional soft landscaping at the building's most sensitive elevation. Parking for 15 cars is proposed, 12 spaces for the 9 residential units and 3 for the office accommodation. Whilst the office parking provision does meet the West Sussex parking guidance, the residential provision is 6 spaces short of the recommended 18 spaces. Officers have considered this point in detail, and we're of the view that as a whole, given the central location of the site and coupled with its proximity to 2 nearby car parks, this means that the overall parking is likely, any overspill parking is likely to be accommodated appropriately and safely. Here is a slide showing the proposed elevations. The residential building is shown on the left and the office building to the right. The residential building comprises 2 stories with a 3rd floor accommodated in the sloping roof space. As you can see from the diagram, the building would measure around 10.5 metres in height and about 5.4 metres to the eaves. At the request of the conservation officer, the roof has been designed at a 45-degree angle to complement the typical roof slope seen in the surroundings. Materials have been kept to a limited palette and include slate roof tiles, flint facades, brick coining detail, and ebony weatherboarding, all of which are present in the immediate local surrounds and within the wider conservation area and are considered to be appropriate. So in summary then, whilst it's acknowledged that the proposed residential building is taller than other buildings within the immediate surrounds, due to the 2-metre setback from Elm Grove Lane, the footprint of the development is in fact smaller, and this coupled with the careful detailing and the choice of carefully selected external materials results in a building that is a vast improvement in appearance than when compared to the existing building, which for a building in a conservation area has little architectural interest. Officers are of the view that the development would ensure the preservation of the conservation area, and this has been agreed by the council's conservation officer. In addition, officers are of the view that the removal of the existing industrial building in favour of residential and office accommodation is likely to improve the amenity of the wider local area, owing to the removal of industrial practices and associated vehicle movements, which are not really conducive along this largely residential character and rural lane. And finally, whilst the parking provision for the residential units is an undersupply against the guidance, the addition of 9 new housing units in this quite central and very convenient location is an obvious benefit in terms of the council's windfall housing targets, which weighs in great favour of the application. So the application is therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Officer Moore. In the chairman's briefing yesterday, there was a query about the number of people who will work in the new office. There was a figure of 20 mentioned, a figure of 9. Were you able to clarify this?
Yes, I was, Chair. I spoke to the agent after we had our discussion yesterday, and the agent has been able to clarify that around about 9 employees would be intended for use in the office space.
Thank you very much. Right, we have one speaker for this application. It's Adam King via video. Would the officers care to play that now?
Good afternoon. My name is Adam King, a Director of ECE Architecture. The application before you for the former B&W building and car park on Elm Grove Lane in Stenning was submitted some 6 months ago and has been amended following a series of design discussions with your planning team. The site represents a brownfield development within the settlement, the redevelopment of which is strongly supported at both national and local planning policy level. The proposed development will remove the discordant industrial use from the centre of Stenning to be replaced with a mixed-use scheme that provides much-needed homes from a range of needs and an office building that would maintain employment on the site. Your planning and conservation officers have been very helpful during the application process, initially accepting the redevelopment of the site is acceptable, whilst expressing some concern over the detailed design of the scheme in terms of height and impact on Elm Grove street scene. We've worked closely with your officers to amend the scheme design, reducing scale and massing, increasing car parking provision, and focusing on specific local detailing to reach the scheme presented to you today. We're pleased that your officers are now in support of the scheme and believe the changes have dealt with many, if not all, of the parish council and local resident concerns for the redevelopment of the site. This proposal, with its focus on local materials and conservation area detailing, will, we believe, greatly enhance the site and add to the historic character of Elm Grove Lane. As part of the planning application, additional reports have been carried out relative to consultee concerns. The scheme has been confirmed as appropriate in terms of access and car parking provision, will improve the ecological quality of the site, and we've also had confirmation that there are no bats present. We believe, therefore, the application is of a very high design quality, will improve the setting of Elm Grove Lane, creates improvement within the conservation area, and will provide much needed new homes and high quality offices. Therefore, we respectfully ask that you support your officer's recommendation and approve the application before you today. Thank you.
Right, thanks to Mr. King. Do officers wish to comment on that?
No comments at this stage.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the ward members. I would like to ask the Vice Chairman of the Planning South Committee, Councillor Lloyd, to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. As we've heard, this development is situated in a very narrow single-way lane off Stenning High Street and is within the Stenning Conservation Area. The proposed buildings, residential accommodation and an office block, as members will have seen, have been designed sympathetically to fit into the architectural vernacular of the lane, particularly as they will be opposite 2 listed cottages, part of a row of very attractive cottages. All good, you might say, unfortunately not so good. And I have a number of objections to the application. An earlier application, ST 1394, was refused on the grounds that the proposal would be detrimental to the residential amenities of adjoining dwellings. In my view, this has not changed. I feel this is an overdevelopment of the site with 9 dwellings on it. I grant that the finishes and design of the buildings are in keeping with the conservation area, but the proposed ridge height of the residential accommodation at 10.5 metres, even though it has been reduced by 1.5 metres, is substantially higher than the refused development in 1994. The reference made in the application to the 3-storey buildings close by that house the Stenning Health Centre and the Croft Meadow Care Home as a justification for this height are superfluous in my view, as they are located in a dip and are virtually hidden from Elm Grove Lane. Conversely, the residential accommodation on this application, will be on the top of the hill, towering above all the adjacent buildings. And you could see that on the elevations. The Stenning Conservation Appraisal states that development should carefully consider the overlooking and overshadowing of adjacent properties. In my view, the residential accommodation represents a significant increase in height and mass over the existing commercial building. And I suggest that this significantly represents harm at the highest level rather than the lowest end of the scale of less than substantial, and would be contrary to policies 32.2 and 3, 33.2, 3 and 4, and 34, 3 and 4, and 5 in terms of scale, design, character, and amenity. Finally, as I'm sure it comes as no surprise, I have concerns over the parking spaces being provided. Elm Grove is, as I've said, and the officers have said, a narrow single-way lane, which is a shared space between vehicles and pedestrians, and is a busy throughway from the High Street to Tanyard Lane, which has access to other parts of the town. Para 6.8 in the application states that traffic movements are estimated at 28 movements per day, with the associated offices generating even less. In my view, this is a grossly underestimated, with 9 dwellings with 16 bedrooms and office accommodation for 9. There are 15 parking spaces provided, when in Para 3.8, West Sussex make the point that 18 is the recommended numbers. Although they go on to cite the proximity of local services and that overspill parking would not be detrimental to highway safety. I also believe it is nonsensical to believe that out of 9 employees, only 3 will commute by car. Anyone living in a rural community like Stenning knows that local bus services are patchy at best. There's no on-street parking in Elm Grove and the High Street, and the surrounding streets are at capacity because of the parking charges and limited numbers of season tickets that are available. Once again, local constraints have not been considered in making decisions on parking, and the parking is, I suggest, contrary to policy 41.2 and 3. Access to Elm Grove Lane from the High Street is narrow with restricted visibility displays and proves a challenge to all delivery vehicles, and the increase in traffic in the lane is potentially dangerous in my opinion. Chairman, because of this, I should be opposing the planning application on the basis that it is, in my belief, it's contrary to policies 32, 33, 34 and 41 of the HTPF, and that I will propose that the developer revisits the design of the residential accommodation to reduce the ridge height and consequent mass of the building to mitigate the detrimental impact and harm on the architectural vernacular of the lane, and that the parking spaces for the residential accommodation are increased to 18. If members are minded to approve the application, I would like to propose that in the pre-commencement conditions that all vehicles load, unload, park on site, and that no vehicles will restrict access to the lane. Secondly, that there is a surveyor's report to ensure that construction will not harm the adjacent listed buildings through any vibration. And thirdly, that the residential accommodation parking spaces are increased to 18. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. I'll now call on the second ward member, Councillor Platt, to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think there's very little that I could add to Councillor Lloyd's very good, very accurate and very comprehensive analysis of the problems there. I think I'd just like to point out that in the Conservation Officer's report on the revised plan, she described the new effort as being on the lower end of harmful. I think that I probably know the best way of damning something with faint praise. I don't think it's on the lower end of harmful. I think the bulk of the building, the overlooking, the fact that it is out of scale for the for the neighbourhood rules it out. And I think it's pretty obvious that when they were looking at this initially, they were looking towards out of the conservation area, towards the Fletcher's Croft Nursing Home and the Stenning Medical Centre, to see what scale of building that would be appropriate for this area. Those buildings are, as Councillor Lloyd has pointed out, are downslope. They are outside of the conservation area. And if they'd simply turned round and looked across the street at the very attractive terraces of cottages there, I think they would have had a much better idea of how to approach this development. So fundamentally, those are the problems, that the excessive height. If you remove a story from this building, then you reduce the number of dwellings, which reduces the amount of parking spaces required, which reduces the amount of traffic in the very narrow Elm Grove Lane with its very awkward access at both ends, and would solve the problem. But as it stands, no, the lower end of harmful, I put it a bit further up the scale of harmful and say that we should be rejecting this proposal. So I would ask members to vote to turn this proposal down. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do officers wish to respond to the ward members at this stage?
Yes, please. I'd like to come back on a couple of points, if I may.
Yes.
The first one with regard to the parking and highways matters. Firstly, with regard to the office parking provision of 3 spaces, this of course is based on the office floor space provision, and this does meet the guidance that West Sussex County Council have required. Therefore, there is no shortfall in this with regard to this element of the proposal. Other highways matters that were raised with regard to the narrowing lane and the tight visibility displays, particularly the junction at the High Street. It's been confirmed by the specialists at the Highways Authority that this matter is obviously an existing situation, and that the area has been operating without any known highway safety issues, particularly over the last 5 years. So no objection has been raised in that regard. The residential side of the development, of course, that does require, in accordance with the recommended guidance, does require 18 unallocated spaces, as was mentioned. Now, 12 spaces are proposed for the 9 units, and this provides one space for each of the 6 smaller units and 2 spaces for each of the 3 3-bed units. This does represent a better than 1-for-1 ratio, which, you know, in a central location such as this is a good standard. In their consultation response, the Highways Authority haven't raised any overspill implications as part of any highway safety issues. And officers are of the view that given the central location of the site, and there is an opportunity here for alternative modes of travel to and from the site, the proximity as well of existing public car parks, namely the Newman's Gardens Council Run car park, which is just to the north of the site. We're of the view that any overspill parking that might result wouldn't have any adverse amenity harm and wouldn't result in any unacceptable highways parking. It's worth noting as well that there isn't any opportunity at all on Elm Grove Lane, as anyone who knows the site knows, for additional parking. So the likelihood, if there was to be any overspill parking, would be for people to want to park within the dedicated car parking at Newman's Gardens, which is free for parking after 6 p.m. every night. There is obviously a balance to be struck here, and we do acknowledge that there is a shortfall against the guidance, but we do think that given the very central location of the site and the better than 1-for-1 parking, we're of the view that on balance the 12 spaces are acceptable here. Just moving on to the point about scale design over development. We do, of course, acknowledge that the building is taller than other buildings within the context of the surrounds, but it must be recognised that just because something is larger doesn't necessarily mean that it equates to harm. We think that given the detailing, the special detailing and the consideration of the palette of materials that have been proposed on the external elevations, we're of the view that this represents a vast improvement on the existing building. which, as you've seen from the pictures, is quite an uninspiring brick-built structure that doesn't really have any architectural merit, particularly given it's in the conservation area. And as a whole, we think that building, the proposed building, does represent an enhancement, and this leads to a preservation of the character of the conservation area as a whole. The sensitive elevation that I referred to in my presentation, which fronts onto Elm Grove Lane, has been subject to many design changes, and these have been negotiated in consultation with officers, the applicant, and in close consultation with the conservation officer. And one important thing to note here is that this elevation has been set back quite considerably from the main road at Elm Grove Lane. There's a 6 metre setback, which has given opportunity for soft landscaping and planting. And we feel that does help significantly in terms of any perceived scale on that elevation and any overlooking. The design on this elevation has been simplified. Previously, there was dormers and balconies and all sorts of other things that have been stripped out. And the other key thing to note here is that the roof has been amended quite significantly to create a traditional 45-degree pitch and a slate roof design, which does complement the other roofs in the local area. So yes, as a whole, yes, the scale of the building is larger, but we feel that the careful detailing and the setback position of that most sensitive elevation does work to preserve the character of the conservation area. And we don't feel that the sensitive southern elevation will be overly dominant in terms of the setting.
Thank you. We will now go to the other members who wish to speak. We actually have 6 who wish to speak. So I would ask them all to try and keep it as brief as possible and not repeat anything that's been said already unless they wish to reinforce it. I'll start with Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point for clarification, if I may. Exactly how many units and how many parking spaces are there in the scheme again? Could we just have that clarified by the officers?
Yeah. It's 12 units as a mix of 1, 2 and 3 bed units. Sorry, there are 9 units, mix of 1, 2 and 3, with 12 parking spaces, and the 3 additional spaces are for the office accommodation. So that's 12 spaces for 9 units.
So it's 1 space per unit plus 3 for the office?
No, sorry, it's 12 parking spaces for 9 units.
Right.
Residential, and then there are 3 separate dedicated spaces for the offices, so that makes a total of 15 parking bays.
Oh, I see. Thanks for clarifying that. That's what was confusing me. Okay, so that's where the 1 for 1 comes from then. So there is slightly more than 1 parking space per unit. Okay. What about provision for accessibility for people with limited mobility, for example? Will they have a dedicated space, or would provision be made? Because I'm thinking if you're including public car parking in a ratio of making what would normally be, if I understand you correctly, normally this would be not acceptable in terms of parking spaces, but you're suggesting that it is acceptable because we have other public car parking available.
So it might not need to be there.
So would we have, for example, some provision in the spaces that are there for anybody with accessibility issues?
Yes, in accordance with the West Sussex standards, which does require disabled parking bays as needed, there is a disabled parking bay that's proposed as part of this site, shown on the site plan, and a condition that we've drafted ensures that that's marked properly and it's got the proper hashing marks around it.
Okay, thank you. So my only comment on the parking then, apart from I think that's unfortunate that we have to use public parking to make up the shortfall. I mean, for example, people would have to pay presumably to leave their car there, which is not ideal. Also, there's an increased risk of damage or theft to a vehicle that's in a public car park, arguably, over one that's kept privately. There may even be an insurance implication on your vehicle if it's not kept on your driveway, as I understand it with some insurers. So that might be something that would be off-putting to somebody wishing to take one of these units on. But there was a comment that was quite concerning, and that was around our housing challenge. So I think we need to be careful that we're not at risk of accepting poor planning in our desire to meet our housing targets. If a scheme's not good enough, the scheme's not good enough. And I thought that it was a legislative requirement of us to to assess the application based on its own merits and not necessarily accepting something that doesn't meet standards just because we've got a horrendous housing target to meet. So that was one point I wanted to make there. The other point was around the change of use. So forgive me because I'm not an expert on this, but as I understand it, Horsham District, we're desperate for light industrial type space, so commercial units. If you look on commercial lettings, hardly anywhere, which means that's some of the reasons why we've accepted some of the schemes in Billingshurst in my ward, for example, for extra commercial space. We're desperate for it. One thing that we are awash with, it seems, on the commercial letting pages on the internet is office space. So the question I've got around that is why are we giving up light industrial type? Is it B2? Forgive me, I don't know what the designation is. Over in favour for office space, of which we seem to have an abundance. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may come back on a few of those points, Chair. With regard to the change of use, you're quite right. The existing lawful use is a mixed commercial use, so that's B1, B2 and B8. B2 being the sort of more industrial processing type use. Part of the consideration here with this application was whether or not that use is still viable and appropriate in this area. Now, in order to assess that, the applicant submitted to us marketing information that showed over the last 12 months the efforts to market the industrial existing use of the site to future occupants. And that information, that marketing information suggested that it just wasn't going anywhere and there wasn't any interest in that site. I think probably given the location is one of the key factors. It's a poorly accessed location for this kind of use, you know, considering you would want to service it with probably larger vehicles and more vehicle movements. It's just not really appropriate. And also given the condition of the building and its age, it's just not really what people are after. So that information was assessed by our colleagues in the economic development team, who did clarify to us that they were happy that the information was acceptable and that a change of use to an office facility would be more appropriate. So that's one point to make. With regard to the housing targets, you're quite right. Poor planning shouldn't be an excuse just to get more units, and that has been considered as part of this application. It's obviously a factor of great weight that we end up here with an extra 9 units if the application is to be approved. But that should not, and it is not, at the expense of poor design and inappropriate development. And then with regard to your first point, I believe, about public parking in the public car park, yes, perhaps not the most desirable, but the car park is extremely accessible and in close proximity to this site. And another factor that we might want to consider is, you know, it's possible we could, as a council, you know, benefit from the extra income that might be afforded our way. And just to note as well that this car park isn't a payable car park after 6 p.m. and that would be probably the most pressing need for parking. So free parking would be available to residents and to visitors in the area after 6 p.m. anyway.
Right, we've got 7 speakers and that'll be the end. At the end of the list is Councillor Chowan and Councillor Lloyd. I'll take Councillor Lloyd last as the ward member. I would ask everybody to try to be brief. We therefore will now go to Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I've lived in the area for getting on for 40 years now, and I'm well aware of that particular lane. So I thank both ward members for their very detailed, especially for Councillor Lloyd's comments on why he and I, as it turns out, think this is totally inappropriate, basically scale and massing. I'd also say that access from the car park has been mentioned, but I believe at the moment that's not wheelchair friendly, unless you go a long way around. The other point I'd like to make is with regard to cycle parking, where I think the officer's report is, shall I say, woolly. But anyway, that now is a minor point and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vickers.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I hear what the local members have said, and I understand their concerns about overlooking and the extra height on the residential proposal. However, I think the design is quite well done, and I think it's attractive. I think it's better than what the existing buildings look like. I understand why members have serious concerns about car parking, but we've lost appeals in Horsham where virtually no car parking when we've had conversion of buildings in the town centre. So I think that was a difficult one to use for a refusal. Can I ask the officers, if we were minded to approve this, Tim Lloyd, Councillor Lloyd referred to this, could there be a construction management plan as one of the conditions?
Yes, absolutely. It's already been drafted. It's condition 3 in the report. That would be a fairly standard procedure.
Because of the sensitivity of the access to the site.
Particularly with regard to the access, yes, because it's a very narrow lane, and the sensitivity of the listed buildings opposite.
Thank you. That gives some reassurance that during the construction that this could be managed carefully. On balance, I think the design is much better than what is currently on site, but I do understand everybody's concerns about car parking. We have this every time we have planning applications for more than 1 or 2 homes. Thank you.
Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just wondering if we could go back to the presentation and have a look at the ridge height again, please, because I am concerned about this. I just want to check the facts before I make any further comment. Okay, thank you. It does appear that's fine. I can see what I thought is the case. It's 3.5 meters higher than the surrounding buildings from the look of it, and it's significantly higher than the original Bowers and Wilkins building. So there has been extra height added to this for the sake of obtaining more area for living space, and therefore the developer can fit in more units. I think this is being a little bit over enthusiastic in the use of space, and I think that compared to the surrounding houses and dwellings, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. I appreciate it's being tried to emulate vernacular architecture, but it's just too much in too small a space. So for that reason, there are more dwellings than the normal allowance of car parks. I don't know if officers have been down to Stenning on a normal day and tried to park in one of the car parks. They are pretty full most of the time anyway. So it's probably going to lead to extra cars possibly breaking the law by parking illegally. It's going to add to the amount of traffic, which is always there anyway. And I just think it's too many units for the space that is currently being planned. So for that reason, I just can't support this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Serkis.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I thought that the comments of the ward councillors were well made. What I don't think was so well made were the comments of the Senior Conservation Officer in paragraph 3.1. In fact, no disrespect to anyone, but this is probably the most tortured wording I've ever seen in a council report presented to the Planning Committee. We have sentences like, although they will not enhance the character of the conservation area, with sympathetic detailing, they will not fail to preserve the character. And then the point that Councillor Bob Platt made reference to, I'm satisfied the level of harm is at the lowest end of the scale of less than substantial. You know, if you're going to say these things, there are much easier, more simple ways of saying it. So I asked myself, Why is this such a tortured report? And I suspect it's because the conservation officer was far from happy, and his lack of happiness with reporting on this is reflected in the tortured nature of the words that have been used. But it did seem to me rather, there are easier ways of saying things than this. And I suggest that the conservation officer and a number of the comments are indeed good reasons in themselves for taking the view that the conservation officer objects. So I don't think one can draw much from the comment that there's no objection from the senior conservation officer. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Serkis. I note that the head of department wishes to speak. Do you wish to speak now or at the end?
Colleague's just going to make a comment. Thank you.
Yes.
Hello, members. If I can just respond to some of the comments on the less than substantial harm matter. That's the test of paragraph 196 of the MPPF. And that's the explicit wording. A development, if it has less than substantial harm, must be weighed against the public benefits of the development. So the conservation officer here has sort of made that judgment, as has officers. And usually there is a sliding scale. When you reach substantial harm, which is a different test altogether, that usually involves the loss of entirety of a heritage asset. So it is about fact and degree relative to the importance of the heritage asset. Hence why the conservation officer has talked about it being at the lower end. As my colleague has said, this is about comparison with the existing building, which sits within the conservation area and surrounding context. What I would advise is that the statutory test of development within a conservation area or affecting the setting of a listed building is whether development preserves or enhances the special character of the area. In this case, the conservation officer is of the view that it doesn't necessarily enhance, but at the same time it meets the test of preservation. That is a matter of planning judgment that we will have obviously expressed our views on. On other matters linked with the scale and form, what I would advise members is that the images you've seen are the immediate context of the building. The buildings immediately opposite to the south and to the west. The buildings on the high streets are invariably much taller and would provide something of a backdrop against the 10.5 metre, I believe, ridge height of the building. Equally, in the views up and down Elm Grove Lane, we have measured the eaves height of the listed buildings, which sits at 5 metres, and the eaves height of the building opposite this proposal is 5.4, with the roof similarly pitching away. Ergo, it wouldn't necessarily have a dominating impact on the setting of these buildings, although obviously we do appreciate that it does have a much taller ridge line. Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice to get two different screenshots of you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. My only comment is that when you're looking at the smaller conurbations and settlements in the district, office space like B1 or A2 would be very welcome in these smaller settlements, because there is a growing need for office space and economic space of this sort. I acknowledge that the fact that we need B2 and B3, B8, but the B1 classification is also extremely useful in terms of small offices in towns. As for the housing on the site, I think it is, somebody said it was overly ambitious. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Chowan.
Yes, Chairman. This is a very unique site, very, very special. I mean, Steding is probably the most historic town in the whole district. And this part is a very unique spot. However, if we're against voting against this because we don't think this is going to enhance the character, I think we're on a sticky wicket, because that building is quite appalling. But probably people have got used to it because it is quite low level and it's been there for an awfully long time. But also, when it was operational, they must have had real issues with people working out of that building, because it's quite a large building. And I would have thought they would have needed the car parking. I noticed that in School Hill, blocks of flats there have about the same ratio of car parking as this, without the additional ability to use the other public car parks, which are very close by. But because this is very unique, I think we should be making sure we get it absolutely right, because we're not going to get another chance. And that lane is absolutely stunning if you don't look at the current building. So if you sort of put your back to it, it is a beautiful, and those cottages down there are to die for. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I would hope that the local society and local members would be really keen on getting something better down there. And so are we talking really about the ridge height and the slight scale? And could we be doing something on that before we plough on with the development? Because it is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get it absolutely perfect down there. And wouldn't it be lovely to get it nice? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to really just to come back on the car parking, because this is quite a major issue. Newman's Gardens car park, the officer was quite right, is free parking after 6 o'clock, but it's pay every day, 7 days a week. So at the weekends when the people are likely to be home, they've still got to pay. And I don't dispute that the building, that they've done their best with the design of the building, but it is very black and very grey. Then you've got grey slate roof, very high pitched roof, and again, it's a well-founded roof because of the design at 45 degrees, but it will be hugely imposing on a very narrow lane. And you're opposite classical grade 2 listed buildings. Admittedly, there's only 2 out of the 6 or 7 cottages that are down that lane. But nonetheless, it will stick out like a sore thumb, and it'll be hugely imposing because it's on the top of the hill. But that's all I really wanted to say. Oh, sorry, just one last thing, Chair. The gate to the car park is not a right of way. Therefore, I think that should be considered in the proposal, if it does go ahead, that I presume that the new owner of the site will actually make that an access point. And as Councillor Croker rightly said, it should be a disabled access. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Yes, the parking one certainly seems to have attracted everybody's attention. County and Para 3-2 say that car parking provision of 12 spaces is still below the required levels, and goes on later to say the county's car parking demand calculator requires a total of 24 parking spaces, but because of the proximity to the centre of town, they think that's quite a good idea. And the maths certainly don't work. I don't understand their floor space analysis at all. I've tried to work it out. But in the business premises, they provide 3 spaces and there's going to be 9 staff. I accept not all 9 staff may drive there, but we just don't know. The county do have a commendable objective with their car parking calculations, which is to try to reduce people's use of cars. And I think we all support that philosophy. But we've had this debate before. I can think of the Lloyds Bank application was another classical one. And the reality is that Stenion is a very attractive house with a lot of oldie world scenarios in it. And I get the feeling that we're trying to sort of put 2 pints into a 1 pint bottle now. I don't believe the village can take any more overspill whatsoever. It's just making it uncomfortable and impossible for everybody. So I do find that the highways one quite astonishing. Anyway, we've had enough of that. Do the officers wish to say anything further before we go to a vote?
No, no comments, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, would Democratic Services like to do the roll call, please?
Yes, of course. So this vote is for the recommendation as given in the report to approve planning permission subject to the conditions printed. Councillor Blackall.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Abstain.
Councillor Chowan.
For.
Councillor Circus.
Against.
Councillor Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Croker.
Against.
Councillor Dorr.
Against.
Councillor Donnelly.
Against.
Councillor Jupp.
Against.
Councillor Kitchen.
Against.
Councillor Lambert.
Against.
Councillor Morgan.
Against.
Councillor Lloyd.
Against.
Councillor Knoll.
Against.
Councillor Platt.
Against.
Councillor Potts.
Against.
Councillor Saeed.
Against.
Councillor Sanson.
Against.
Councillor van der Kloot.
Against.
Councillor Vickers. Councillor Vickers.
Four.
Thank you. So that's 3 for, 15 against, and 2 abstentions.
Would the ward members wish to propose a counter proposal?
Yes, if I may, Chair. As much as I think the developers have put together in terms of the finishes, an attractive design that will fit in, I still question its blackness. But anyway, I think they have made the right decisions. And I would propose, therefore, that they come back to the planning committee and they revisit the overall height. It's the imposing height which is the factor here, and increase the parking to 18 spaces for the residential accommodation.
Head of planning, I think we need something more firm on this, don't we?
It does appear that the proposal is to defer the item. I would just seek some advice from my legal colleagues. My initial view is that the changes being suggested are fundamental to the scheme, and therefore it's not something that we could deal with as part of a deferral. My view is we need to make a decision today, but I would just seek some advice from my legal colleagues, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that it's quite a significant amount of work that proposal that's been put forward. So I would want to know if you want to if this decision is to defer it, or if you want for all the considerations which the councillors have raised, or if you want to refuse it today. If that's
we've refused it.
Sorry, so basically, you want to come back on what, as in with the amendments that are being requested, and see if that can come in as a new application. Is that what you're asking, Emma? Sorry,
Chairman, if I could just step in, we've taken the
decision. Yeah,
the decision. The vote and the recommendation has not been approved. And so what we have to discuss now is, so a member can move an alternative motion to approve with amended conditions, or a member can move an alternative motion to refuse and give the planning reasons. And I think what the head of development was explaining was that what has been talked about with regard to the imposing size and the parking, particularly the height of the building, there's too much there with regard to deferring. So the reasons amount to what I would consider, and I think the head of development as well is in agreement. There is too much work that would need to take place prior to this coming back. So with regard to what has been proposed by Councillor Lloyd, in my opinion, and again, it's for members and the chair and head of development to come to agreement, it would be to move an alternative motion to refuse based upon the planning reasons that are given. Certainly the imposing height and the issue with the parking, we need to put and help with some planning reasons. But that is my recommendation with regard to what should be moved and what should be put forward now.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd, would you like therefore to propose a motion for refusal with reasons?
Yes, my proposal for refusal is that residential accommodation represents a significant increase in height and mass over the existing building, and it has a detrimental impact and harm on the adjacent properties and is contrary to policies 32.2 and 3, 33.2, 3 and 4, and 34, 3 and 4, and 5, in terms of scale, design, character, and amenity. That's proposal 1. And the second is that the second part of it is that the 15 parking spaces provided for the residential accommodation are insufficient, and that the proposal is that this should be increased to 18.
Nothing about the business parking?
It's a good point, but I think, to be fair, we probably got a good win if we get 18. But I don't dispute that there is an issue there. But with 21 parking spaces, I personally would be happier with that.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Platt is seconding. Right, would the officers like to do a roll call, please?
Yes, okay, so the second vote is the refusal for the refusal of this application for the reasons that Councillor Lloyd has put forward. So Councillor Blackall.
Abstain.
Councillor Brown.
Abstain.
Councillor Chowan.
For.
Councillor Serkis.
For.
Councillor Clark.
Abstain.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Dorr.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Kitchen.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Knoll. Sorry, Councillor Knoll.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
Abstain.
Councillor Saeed.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor van der Kloot.
For.
Councillor Vickers.
Abstain.
Thank you. So that is 15 votes for and 5 abstentions. So that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to item 7, if the officers would like to lead on their report.
Good afternoon. This application site comprises land at the junction of Old London Road and Montpellier Gardens near Washington. The site sits just west of the A24 and is not within a defined settlement boundary. It is currently used informally as allotments by local residents. This is the site as existing, and this is its context along Montpellier Gardens. The site forms part of a broader allocation under Policy 1 of the Storrington, Sullington and Washington Neighbourhood Plan that allows for infill housing development in the blue hatched area shown here. As a result of this policy, the application seeks to build 3 three-bedroom houses on the site. These are the proposed floor plans, and these are the proposed elevations, which pick up on the general form and materials of Montpellier Gardens. This is a section through the site which rises to the west. As you can see, the first floor would sit broadly at the ground floor level of the existing houses to the rear. And finally, these are some illustrative visuals of the dwellings. The application accords with the principles set out in the neighbourhood plan policy allocation and is recommended for approval subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one speaker, Rebecca Hode, the agent, who's speaking via Zoom.
Thank you, Chair. The scheme before you today relates to the erection of 3 dwellings on land which is situated within Montpelier Gardens, where development is supported under Policy 1 of the Neighbourhood Plan. As such, and as set out in the officer's report, the principle of housing development on this site is considered acceptable. Significant attention has been paid to surrounding residential properties to avoid any detrimental impact on neighbouring amenity. In this regard, the existing topography of the site has been optimised to avoid interlocking between 2 Montpelier Gardens and the proposed dwellings, which would appear as 1 storey in height to number 2. The proposed dwellings and associated landscaping have been designed to a high standard, with the opportunity to include additional landscaping post-determination, particularly on the southern corner of the site, which will be secured by condition. As confirmed by the relevant consultees, the proposals would be acceptable in terms of highways, parking, noise, ecology, climate change, flood risk, and drainage, subject to compliance with conditions. The scheme is considered therefore to produce 3 family dwellings of a high quality which will enhance local distinctiveness whilst protecting fully the amenities of neighbouring residents. The proposals seek the efficient use of this underused site, helping to secure its optimum use whilst providing a valuable contribution towards Horsham's housing need. The presumption in favour of this development must therefore apply, and I therefore urge you to uphold your officer's recommendation of approval and grant consent for this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hode. We'll now go to the ward members, and we'll start with Leader of Council, Councillor Daw.
Thank you, Chairman. My only query is actually one that was raised with me by the Chairman of Washington Parish Council. I think for convenience, I would read it. It's not very long. I think his concern is that a lot of the strength of support for this is because it's a designated site in the neighbourhood plan. And what he says is, this is virtually next to the neighbourhood plan, the site mentioned neighbourhood plan is Vineyards. This is virtually next to the application site and has recently been granted consent for new homes, which is supported by Washington PC. The draft neighbourhood plan originally designated 2 sites, Vineyards and Old Luckings Yard, primarily brownfield. HDC has still harboured concerns that this long redundant site could be considered employment land, and the inspector advised that it be covered in a general statement without naming it as the area in and around Montpelier Gardens. It wasn't envisaged that this would be extended to the allotment site, which is a bit of green space in what is becoming quite a built-up zone. It's really just to get officers' comments on that, please. Otherwise, I've got no further points to make on this, Chairman.
Could officers please comment?
Yes, I will just share a screen with you, so please bear with me. So I have here the wording of the neighbourhood plan policy. So as Councillor Daw said, the parish obviously in their initial intention was that Luckings Yard, which I believe is this site H just to the south, was to be an allocated site. However, that hasn't come forward in the made plan. Made plan, policy 1 part 2, as shown in the blue highlight here, specifically allocates development within the blue hatched area, which does include the allotment site here. So if the parish or the neighbour plan group, shall I say, wasn't intending that the allotment site was to come forward potentially for housing, they should have excluded it from the hatched area. As a matter of fact, they haven't. So applying the policy in its strictest and clearest terms, this is a site that the neighbourhood plan does technically allocate for development, which includes housing.
Thank you. Could we now go on to the other ward member, the Chair of Licensing, Councillor Sanson, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Dawes actually asked the same question that I was going to ask. However, the thought has crossed my mind that currently a part of that is being used as allotments. What provision has been made for additional or other allotments being made available to these allotment holders?
Officers?
So these allotments are in private ownership, and our understanding is they've been used informally as such. They're not under the control of the parish or any other formal body. So there's no policy requirement to replace them elsewhere. So it's an unfortunate case that they would be lost. But as I say, the policy allocation does sort of supersede, if you like, their current use as allotments.
Okay, Councillor Sanson?
Not really. I think it's very sad that people should lose their allotments, particularly in times like these. I think something should be put forward to help those allotment holders.
Well, perhaps the leader of council would wish to make some funds available. Apparently not. Do any other members wish to speak on this proposal? Right, as no other members wish to speak on it, do officers wish to say anything in finality before we go to the vote? No further comment. Councillor Serkis does wish to make a comment. Councillor Serkis.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to make the point that Councillor Sanson made, and I just wonder whether somebody could tell me how many individual allotments there are. These are very valuable at a time like this, given the concern of people's mental health and so forth. And there's been lots of news coverage of the very beneficial effect. So I don't know whether anyone can tell me how many people, individual people, are going to be affected by closing these, the allotments. The second thing is just a small point of drafting, but I was, you'll have to forgive me, being a lawyer, looking at the meaning of words and playing around with words is what I spent my life doing. 1.6. Montpellier Gardens is characterised by 1930s red brick post-war 2-storey semi-detached residential dwellings. Well, there's a sense in which every building in the country is post-war, but it's either, for these purposes, it's either interwar years or it's post-war. It can't really be both. Thank you, Chairman.
Adherent comment. On the allotments matter, if it's private land, of course, it's very sad. I agree to lose allotments, but that's a private matter, and I think it's outside the ambit of this particular meeting. As there are no other requests to speak, could I ask the officer to kindly do the roll call?
Yes, of course. So this vote will be for the officer's recommendation to approve planning permission subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Councillor Blackall.
For.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Chowan.
For.
Councillor Serkis.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Daw.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Kitchen.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Knoll.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Saeed.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor van der Kloot.
For.
And Councillor Vickers.
For.
Thank you. So that's 19 for and 1 against. So the motion is carried.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 8, demolition of existing dwelling, kennels, etc., etc., etc. Erection of one building, operation of business, offering hire and sell non-mechanical plant, etc. Erection second building for that. And this is Henfield. The recommendation to approve, and the officers are now going to lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I start, members are advised that the development description should refer to building 2 as being for B1C and B8 use, not B1A and B8 use as written. Apologies for that error. So this application site comprises a former kennels, animal hospital and vacant dwelling set on a rectangular parcel of land opposite the Henfield Business Park. This is the site as existing. The site is allocated for employment development within the draft Henfield Neighbourhood Plan. The plan has passed through examination and a decision statement has been issued. Although a referendum on the plan cannot be held until at least May next year, the advanced stage of the plan is such that it and this draft allocation carry significant weight in decision making. The proposal seeks commercial development on the site in line with the draft plan. 2 buildings are proposed, along with a new access from the Shoreham Road. The first building comprises a mix of B1, B2 and B8 for business looking to relocate within the area. The second building is for 4 B1C or B8 units. These are the elevations of building 1, and these are the same elevations of building 2. This is the visual of the site entrance with the proposed planting once matured. And this is a CGI of the site in its context. Note the field to the left is also allocated for commercial development in the draft Henfield Neighbourhood Plan. Given the significant weight to be attached to the site's allocation for commercial use within the draft Henfield Neighbourhood Plan, the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 speakers in favour of the application by video. Could we please start with Sean Preston, the applicant?
Good afternoon, members. I'm Sean Preston and I'm the applicant submitting the plans before you. My family has been... Good afternoon, members. I'm Sean Preston and I'm the applicant submitting the plans before you. My family has been in Henfield since 1945, having moved here from rural Hampshire. I was schooled locally at Henfield and then Stenning. I started my own business at 21 at Furson's in Albourne, where I've been renting for 30 years. Southdown Engineers Limited was set up by myself and my late father in 1997. We offer non-mechanical plant hire, such as temporary roadways, alongside specialist transport and project lifting. Some of the projects that we've worked on include Rampion, the coastal flood defences, the new observation platform at the Warnham Reserve and the Shard. We've outgrown our current site and plans to improve our offering are being restricted. Our need for quality employees and achieving the ever-rising bar of industry compliance for our blue-chip customers are being hampered by the poor condition of the spaces that we currently rent. Also, it will be unlawful to continue to rent commercial buildings that do not comply with EPC rating of E from April 2023. So our current base will need to be demolished and rebuilt, rendering us homeless. We employ 18 full-time staff and will create further jobs once established in the new premises. The average commute to the proposed site will be just 5.5 miles. Staying local is vital to avoid losing valued staff and remain in the centre of our supply chain. Also, with an eye to the future, we've designed a flexible access layout, which, subject to the appropriate consents and ongoing negotiations, has been offered to the adjoining parcels of land in the neighbourhood plan. Ultimately, I'm confident enough to invest in my life's work in this project, and once completed, it should benefit not just us, but Henfield and its people well into the coming century. Thank you for your time, and I hope you can support our proposal today.
Many thanks to Mr. Preston for his video representation. We now have Lawrence Stringer via video who supports.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Lawrence Stringer. I'm the transport consultant acting on behalf of the applicant, Sean Preston. I have over 30 years experience in development transport planning, with 18 years working at West Sussex County Council, assessing development proposals. I have undertaken a thorough assessment of the proposed development, covering assessing the impact of any additional vehicle trips on the highway network, designing the proposed highway improvement scheme, including the right turn lane, ensuring adequate visibility is provided for the proposed access based on the recorded speed of traffic, ensuring the access will work well within its capacity, taking into account the existing access opposite, ensuring adequate car, lorry and cycle parking and turning is provided on site. When assessed against the previous use of the site, the proposal will only lead to a small increase in vehicle trips. Without taking into account the previous use, the number of additional trips is only 19 in the peak hours, which can easily be accommodated on the surrounding highway network without affecting highway capacity or safety. The development will provide closure of an existing substandard access, creation of a new access with right turn lane and visibility to West Sussex County Council standards, improved bus stop and shelter facilities, car and cycle parking in accordance with West Sussex County Council standards, including disabled spaces and electric charging vehicle spaces, adequate parking and turning for lorries, cycle parking in accordance with West Sussex County Council standards. The proposed access and right turn lane have been thoroughly assessed by West Sussex County Council over many months. They have accepted the proposed impact of the development and agreed the proposed access arrangements meet their requirements. Overall, there are no unacceptable highway or transport impacts as a result of the proposal, and the development cannot be considered to have a severe transport impact.
I thank Mr. Stringer for his video presentation, and the last supporter is the agent Catherine Sadler by video.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Catherine Sadler and I am the planning consultant acting on behalf of Sean Preston of Southdown Engineers. This site is allocated for employment development under policy 3.1 and 3.15 of the draft Henfield Neighbourhood Plan. The Neighbourhood Plan has successfully passed through examination and therefore carries significant weight in the determination of this application. The site is a brownfield site which has been in employment and business use and run as a cattery, kennels, animal hospital, grooming parlour with offices. The fact that this is a brownfield site is a material consideration in favour of redevelopment. The site is located directly adjacent to the former brickworks site, opposite Henfield Business Park, and to the south of two other sites allocated in the draft neighbourhood plan for employment development. The site is therefore clustered with other employment and industrial buildings, which reduces the visual impact of the development. Buildings have been designed have a maximum ridge height of 7 metres, which will reduce their visual prominence. The applicant proposes a substantial soft landscaping scheme, which will help assimilate the buildings into the landscape setting, and the buildings will be timber clad in order to soften their landscape impact. The council's landscape architect has no objection. The applicant is agreeable to the hours of use conditions. The doors to the B2 uses will be kept closed except for when people and vehicles access the building, and no power tools will be used in the open air. These measures will ensure noise does not affect residential amenities. The proposal would enable an existing employer in the district to relocate to new premises so that he can expand and invest in his growing company, and would include new employment floor space suitable for use by smaller start-up businesses, which is needed within the district. I therefore hope you are able to support this application. Thank you for listening.
I thank Catherine Sadler for her video presentation. I note with interest that para 311, Henfield Parish Council, no objection. 312, most unusual, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. 1 letter of comment and 18 letters of support. Quite interesting. Right, ward members, I call on Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as you say, it's unusual for an application of this nature not to receive objections from local people. And yet here, as you say, we have no objections, yet 18 letters of support. This is an expanding company providing work for local people, wanting to move from their existing local premises and wishing to remain in Henfield, which is to be congratulated. As we've heard, this site is part brownfield and is adjacent to the Henfield Business Park and to a site which has a B8 storage use. It's also identified as a suitable site in the emerging neighbourhood plan, which is close to being made. Whilst there have been some concerns over the access, those have been resolved or are complied with or covered by the conditions. So I have therefore no objection, no problems in proposing that this is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. And I call in Councillor Potts, the second ward member, to speak, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The only real reason this has come before us today is a pesky virus well known to us all. Unfortunately, there are no exceptions in the event of a pandemic. So the fact that the Henfield Neighbourhood Plan is not adopted, which it most probably otherwise would have been, means that despite this site being included in the plan, it has now had to come to committee. This is a sustainable business. The area boosting the local economy. This makes very good use of everything the council should be looking to promote. It also comes with the great from the parish, local business and residents alike. I urge my fellow members of the council to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, Cabinet Member for Economy.
Thank you, Chairman. Wearing my hat as Cabinet Member for the Economy, I totally support this planning application. It's a pleasure to see a brownfield site used for business and for employment, and it's one of those rare ones, and it's a shame we don't have many more. So I would just endorse and say that this is absolutely fantastic opportunity for the community and for business. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Noel.
Thank you, Chairman. I too support this application. However, I've just been looking through the conditions. I just wanted to check that due to its proximity to Sussex Wildlife Headquarters and to South Downs National Park, there is some restriction on floodlighting. I'm just wondering if the officers, in case I've missed it, if the officers can point me towards that. I'm not sure I could see it. Thank you.
Officers.
Yeah, there are restrictions in here. Bear with me while I find them. The ecological impact has been considered since the outset, certainly, and certainly a lot of light information about the street lighting within the site has been submitted, and our ecologists are happy with that. We have condition 20. Oh no, sorry, wrong one. We can certainly revisit it and make sure that there is absolute clarity on the lighting. Usually what we say is that the lighting should be in accordance with the submitted details and no other lighting except by way of application. So
11.
And that's the condition that we'll be applying. We can add that in, certainly.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm just concerned about bats and other ecology that are in the locality, and we don't want them frightened away for any reason at all. Thank you very much.
But just to clarify, that would have been caught up in the ecological conditions we've got, and we've got 3 of them. But for absolute clarity, we'll add in an extra condition making clear about lighting strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Noel. Right, last speaker is the Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning, Councillor Vickers.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I totally support this application. And just for interest to members, I wrote to the Secretary of State about parishes who were waiting for referendums on the neighbourhood plan, and I've had a response back saying that it's with the discretion of the District Council to pay SIL in full to those parishes that are still waiting. So that's good news. I'm hoping the District Council will support that. Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent news, Councillor Vickers. Councillor Croker, you wish to come on.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just sitting here looking at the aerial view, and I'd like to say that I support this application. I welcome the appearance of solar panels, and I hope they do appear in the final built version of the site, but also would comment that with industrial buildings, you do have this opportunity to make use of solar PV, and in this case, it's a pity that more opportunity hasn't been taken to alter the roof line so that you can get greater benefit from PV. But anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Yeah, good point. Head of Development.
If I can just pop back in, I found the relevant text for Councillor's question about lighting. It said the second half of condition 20. Condition 20 relates to mitigation enhancement in accordance with ecological surveys and reports. And it expressly says all external lighting shall be installed in accordance with the specifications and locations set out in the scheme and maintained thereafter, And most critically, no other external lighting shall be installed without prior consent from the local planning authority. So that condition covers off what the council is concerned about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We've now come to the end of that. And before the vote, do officers wish to say anything else in finality? No further comment from officers. Would the Democratic Service Officer kindly take the roll call?
Of course, so this vote is for the officer's recommendation in the report to approve planning permission subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Councillor Blackall.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Chowan.
For.
Councillor Circus.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Daw.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Kitchen.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Knoll.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Saeed.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor van der Kloot.
For.
And Councillor Vickers.
For.
Thank you. So that is unanimous in favour, 24.
Thank you very much. We now move on to agenda item 9, erection of a 2-storey side extension, single-storey rear extension, Millstream Vet Group, which you've already heard that several members use, but I would imagine far more use it than we've heard. And one should note that the applicant is Horsham District Council. The application is to grant planning permission. Would the officers like to lead? Thank you very much.
So this application site comprises a veterinary surgery in Storrington, accessed off North Street. This is an aerial photo of the site with public car parks adjoining to the south. This is the front and rear of the site, and this is the rear boundary. The application seeks to add extensions at ground and first floor level to its rear north side. This is a site plan as existing, and this is the site plan as proposed. These are the floor plans with the extensions shown in pink, and these are the proposed elevations. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have no speakers. I therefore will go to the ward members. I'll go first to the Chair of Licensing, Councillor Sanson.
I support the application.
Thank you very much. Leader of Council, Councillor Daw.
I have no problems with this application.
And as we know, the third ward member, Councillor West, is apologies made. Do any members wish to speak? No members wish to speak. Do the officers wish to say anything before we go to the vote? No, the officers do not wish to say anything further. Could we please go to the vote?
Of course, apologies for that. So this is a vote for the recommendation as printed in the officer's report to grant planning permission subject to the appropriate conditions as relayed in the report. Councillor Blackall.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Chowan.
For.
Councillor Circus.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Croker.
For.
Councillor Daw.
For.
Councillor Donnelly.
For.
Councillor Jupp.
For.
Councillor Kitchen.
For.
Councillor Lambert.
For.
Councillor Morgan.
For.
Councillor Lloyd.
For.
Councillor Knoll.
For.
Councillor Platt.
For.
Councillor Potts.
For.
Councillor Saeed.
For.
Councillor Sanson.
For.
Councillor van der Kloot.
For.
And Councillor Vickers.
For.
Thank you. So that is unanimous in favour, 24.
Thank you very much. There are no urgent business, so we'll call the meeting closed. I would particularly like to thank Joe and Liz for all the hard work they've been doing recently. I know they've been under a little bit of a cosh, as have many officers, but they particularly, I think, recently. So I wish everybody a safe journey home or into their lounge or wherever, and all the very best. Cheers.